I've heard this a few times, and ironically, it's pretty much always in the same scenario, almost like people need to will themselves to believe it in order to accept it or something. But when I hear the term, it's the only explanation when someone is talking about physics, it really bothers me because that is a meaningless statement that leads people not to question something that doesn't work or seem to work. You know, it comes up, as I said, very often when someone mentions the double slit experiment and why it means light is wave-like. I was watching a video about the frequency of light having an interference pattern caused by light in time, and they said the only explanation is that light travels through time. And because everyone's still stuck in this mindset that time always travels at the same speed, and I don't think that that's right. I don't think that that makes sense. I don't think that evidence points towards that in the slightest. I think that the reason why we believe that is because people said it's the case. And just because we said it's the case doesn't mean it is. And so they see this basically, if that was a little convoluted, basically what the guy said is they did this experiment and they shot a laser and they had some kind of screen that would allow the light to pass through most of the time, but they could do something to it. I don't know if they sent like a charge through it or what, that would turn it reflective for an instant and then turn back to transparent again. And so what they did was they were shooting a laser through it and they had it so it would reflect the light towards a sensor. And so they were shooting the laser through and the laser's just constant shooting through, and then they had the screen that can turn reflective for just an instant. Boop. And then you get your signal over here. The light hits the sensor and you get your frequency of the light, right? And then they were like, okay, well, what happens if we do 2 iterations back to back really quickly, right? So it'll reflect the light over to the sensor, let the light pass through, then do it again, like one after another. So it'll be as if we shot 2 photons, right? It's more than 2 photons, but it'll be as if we shot like 2 individual beams, I guess, relatively at the same time, but not the same time. They're both shooting at the same location, but one was shot slightly earlier. And so basically what happened was when they did this is that all of a sudden they started getting a frequency interference pattern, because what they're detecting is not like tons of photons on the wall shot from the laser getting split in space, but now they were seeing a split, quote, like an interference pattern, quote unquote, instead of in space, but in time. And they said the only explanation is that some light is traveling forward in time and interfering with itself, and some light is traveling back in time and interfering with itself. And I don't think that you need this interference and traveling forward and back in time thing. What's happening here is that some photons have higher energy than other ones, and as such travel at a faster speed. And even though they're all still relatively the same photons, right? They're all the same. They're getting shot out of, like, say it's red photons because they're all getting shot out of a red laser. Not every photon coming out of that laser is identical. They're not. It doesn't make sense that they would be. So you're shooting them out and, they're all relatively around the same range, but they're not exactly identical. They all have slightly different energies. And when we're talking on scales that it's a small difference, but when you're moving at that speed, a small difference in energy is a significant difference in speed. And, well, anyway, what's happening is that some of these ones are traveling forward in time, because they're traveling faster than the majority of the photons, and some are traveling back in time because they're traveling slower than some of the photons. And so all of a sudden this mystical light travels forward in time, and we don't observe that really anywhere. So like, why is that the only explanation? And I don't like that we get trapped in this, and this is why we have problems, because the only explanation doesn't make any sense, but we say it makes sense. And everyone's like, oh yeah, well that makes total sense, but it doesn't make any sense. Why would it do that? Why would it need to do that? If light could travel, if light takes the path of least time and it could get somewhere sooner, it would do it. And it wouldn't go back in time because it takes the path of least time. And this goes into the light takes every path thing. Light does not take every path. It doesn't need to take every path, right? The majority of light, like what happens is that photons get shot out in every direction. But those photons will never end up over there. They went in their straight line and their straight path. There is no shortest path for light because it doesn't have a destination in mind. You can't shine a light over there and say, yes, that was the shortest path to get to that point, because the light doesn't care. Like I see like the explanation for light bending in a material, and they say, oh, well, the light travels at this path because it actually takes the path of least time. The light does not care about taking the path of least time. It does not care about its destination. It's not trying to get to that point in particular, right? So using that kind of logic that, oh, well, it's, testing out all the paths to see which one is the fastest and then going that way. No, that's not the case. What we observe is just wherever the most photons were directed. And so they go in a straight line and they end up at that point, and all of a sudden, whoa, it was the fastest it got there. Well, yeah, it's the fastest that it got there because that's where it was going, right? Wherever it's going, that it's a direct path, it's going to be the fastest way it got there. It's not that mystical. When you really think about it, it's not that mystical. If if you're walking in a straight line and then, something's in your way and then you walk around it, right? So no one's going to be like, whoa, how did you know that was the fastest path? You were like, I just stepped around the thing in my way. It's not that mystical. It's really not. I don't understand why it's treated as such, and it creates this weird, travels forward in time thing. If it could be faster, it would be, right? Because if not, then what are you implying there? That light decides what speed it wants to go at every given moment? Like, really think about that. That doesn't make any sense. Where's the logic in that? For what reason would it do that? Anyway, saying stuff like that just really upsets me, because it tells everyone you're dumb for thinking this is wrong, because it's the only possible explanation. And that's not how science works, and that's not how we get solutions. And the problem with science is that you need to, catch people up to speed, but some lecturers will explain the material as if it is fact, as if there's no room to doubt. And for certain things you could say, okay, well, like, this has been heavily proven here, right? But at the same time, you can't put that impression in people's minds, because it then leads people not to question these things. And everything is a theory. It's just a theory. It is not a fact. And so to go out and display them as facts is an extreme disservice to the entire world, because you're telling everyone, don't worry about this, we figured this out. And just because you think you have an answer doesn't mean you're right? Just because it's working doesn't mean it's correct, if I gave you 4 wheels, right, to put on a car and you only put 3 on, it'll probably still drive, right? But it's not correct, right? You're still missing something, It's just, I don't know. It's a little, I think that is part of the problem we are having in the physics world. That's why there hasn't been crazy amounts of changes to the status quo, because everyone's too afraid to question and look dumb. And it's funny when some of the most influential people in the field weren't even necessarily, like, some of them were, the peak physicists of their time, but like Einstein was a nobody and came up with stuff that has revolutionized it. And now everyone's like, oh, Einstein is like synonymous with a genius. But no one thought he was a genius when he was first talking about this stuff. No one cared about anything he had to say. And I don't think that points like that, like stuff like that, is also not explained enough to people. That some of the smartest people, like some of the smartest discoveries, were happenstance. And I think that that's important to, it seems like it's a disservice to the people that discovered them, but it's important to let people know that they don't have to be a genius to be a genius. It just takes some thought and to think about things in a way that no one else has yet. And, everyone wants to think they're right. I like to think that I'm right. There's a chance that everything I've said was completely wrong and I don't know anything about anything I'm talking about, but the reality is no, I don't. I'm just having fun, but I started to realize that I either severely misunderstand the world or everyone else does. And so I decided, what the heck, I'll make videos. So, yeah. I think on that note, peace out.